In 10.2, we're going to look at fraction exponents. So the idea is that if we have a fraction exponent, let's say 3/5, just as an example, then we're going to use the phrase raise over root to determine what's going on with this business. So we're going to raise x to the third power. That's the top one. Raise is over the root. And then we're going to take the fifth root of that. So that's how that works, is that the bottom number tells you what root number it is, and the top number tells you what you're raising it to. Raise over root. So with number 1, they give us 1,000, and that's being raised to the 2/3. I know the fraction looks a little weird like that, but that's how they do it. Then what this is asking you to do is take the cube root of 1,000 and then square it. Or you could take 1,000 and square it and then take the cube root of that answer. Now that is a big number and I don't want to do that. In fact, anytime you have a number and you're asked to simplify, always do the root first, because that'll be a smaller number. So the cube root of 1,000 is what times itself 3 times? That's 10. 10 times 10 times 10. So the cube root of 1,000 becomes 10, and then square that, and you get 100. Right? Number 2, you have -8 raised to the 4/3. So again, we're going to do the cube root, but of -8, and then we're going to raise that answer to the 4th power. Cube root of -8, remember negative is cool with odd roots. So this is -2, because that's what times itself 3 times gives you 8. And then -2 to the 4th is going to be positive 16, because that's -2 times -2 times -2 times -2. These two become 4, these two become 4, and then 4 times 4 is 16. Okay, that is just me doing it by hand, but you can always use a calculator to do that as well. In fact, you could do a calculator to do this. All you would write would be, -8 in parentheses, and then do this little button, and then a parentheses, and then 4 divided by 3, close parentheses. And this, in your calculator, will give you this. Cool, huh? All right. Now, what happens if you have a negative power? Well, I don't know if you remember from negative powers, but that just means it comes down. And we're going to do that first. So 1/9 to the positive 1/2. And this is raised over root, so it's a square root of 9 to the 1st. And so that's just 3. So negative powers just mean it's going to become a fraction. That's all. -64. It's raised to the -2/3. So the first thing is bring it down. Keep the -64. Don't change him, but change the power to 2/3. Okay. So all we did was change the negative to positive, and we moved it down, just like this. And then we're going to do raise over root in the denominator. So it's the cube root of -64, and then we're going to square it, right? Raise over root. Cube root of -64, what times itself 3 times gives you -64? That's -4, I believe. And again, use your calculator to check. And then -4 squared is like saying -4 times -4, and that's positive 16. Okay. Number 5. 6 and 7 are all asking you to remember your old exponent rules. So if you're multiplying 2 things with the same base, you add. If you divide 2 things with the same base, you subtract. That old chestnut. So z to the -2/5 times z to the positive 3/5. Here, because we're multiplying 2 things with the same base, we're going to add. So it's going to be -2/5 plus 3/5 going on. And if you remember your fraction rules, common denominator, it means you just go ahead and combine the top Different signs subtract, keep the larger number sign, keep the denominator, and you're done. Z to the 1/5. That's all they want you to do. You don't have to change this to the 5th root of z. They start you off in exponents that are fractions, and they don't tell you to change it, then you just keep them like that. X to the 5/7 times x to the 3/4 divided by x to the negative 6/5. So here's a little thing where you have choices. So these two are being multiplied, so you get to add those two together. That's what I'm going to do first. So 5/7 plus 3/4. And I'm going to leave him alone for now. Right? Now, common denominator says if I'm going to find a common denominator, I can multiply them together. And if I do that, I can cross multiply. I don't know if you remember that business, but look, 20 plus 21 all over 28. That's from how to do fractions. And of course, you can put 5/7 plus 3/4 in your calculator, get a decimal, change that back to fraction if you want. I don't know, it seems like a lot of work. But this is 41 over 28. Actually, this seems a lot of work. Negative 6 over 5. Okay. Now, when I divide two things, I subtract. So I really am going to say 41 over 28 minus negative 6/5, like so. And the minus minus becomes plus. So now I have to find a common denominator again, multiply, cross multiply. And I'm going to be given 41 times 5 is 205. And then plus 28 times 6 is what? 28 times 6 is like saying 30 times 6 is just 180. Minus 12 is 168. And all that's over 28 times 5, which is 140. Right? No, that doesn't sound right. That is right. Okay. And so this ends up being 205 plus 168 is 373 over 140. Oh my God, is that the right answer? Number 6? Yep, it sure is. Gross. But hey, that's how you do it. So now you know. I'm surprised I left that thing in there. This one's not so bad. 16x to the 6th, y to the 4th, and that's being raised to the 1/2 power. So if you remember, power on the outside means it goes on everything. Everything. For numbers, you're just going to raise 16 to the 1/2 power, which we're going to talk about in a second. We already have. But for anytime you have a power raised to another power, you multiply them. So this is 6 times 1/2, and this is 4 times 1/2. So 16 to the 1/2 is like saying square root of 16, right? And then when you say 6 times half, it's like saying half of 6. When you say 4 times 1/2, it's like saying half of 4. All right, so last thing, square root of 16 is 4. X cubed, y squared is the answer for number 7. Okay, so like these three are definitely type of problems you'll see on the quiz where I'm asking you to work with fractions again. Sorry, but you got to know your fraction stuff, buddies, boys and girls. This stuff is very like, can you do this on your calculator versus can you do it by hand? And you know, we used to make you do it by hand. But now I'm not going to be able to watch you do these quizzes, so I'm just going to assume. Number 8, 9, and 10 are asking you to change it back into exponential with a fraction. So they start you off with this. And then they say, okay, change it to exponents. So remember, raise over root. Raise is 6, and then the root number is 10. Well, that is a fraction that reduces, isn't it? Oh. So we divide by 2 in both the top and bottom, and we get 3/5. Right? Now they want you to write your answer in radical notation, so they want you to put it back. So it's now the 5th root of x cubed. So I guess you could look at the original one and the answer and go, hey, if they both have a 2, I could just divide a 2 out of the root and the raise, and yeah, you don't have to write all this business. Sure, you can go straight from here to here if you want. Oh. All right. Now that is one way to do it, especially since we're learning this with rational exponents. That's the way they want you to do it. So here's what I'm going to do for this one. I'm going to change it to 12 over 8 for x, and then 20 over 8 for y, right? So you're changing it raise over root, and then you're going to reduce those two. So it's going to be x to the divided 4, and you get 3 halves. Here you divide a 4, and you get 5 halves, right? Well, they both still have a 2 root, so you can do a square root now for x to the 3rd and y to the 5th. Yeah. That's how they want you to do it, I believe. Now you can do more, and let me look at the answer and see if that's what they want for number 9. No, they don't. Okay. We'll talk about what more you can do when we get to 10.3, which is in the last week. But for now, you're just changing it to fractions and reducing and then changing back. So, all right, so we got 20 root, good Lord. 2y in parentheses to the 5. So this is your base, and it just happens to be two things. We want to keep it like that. So 2y is now going to be raised to the 5 over 20. Remember, raise over root. And ooh, you can reduce it. Divide by 5, you get 1 over 4. And now when you change it back, it's going to be the 4th root of 2y to the 1st. You don't even need the parentheses anymore. Okay? All right. And that's 10.2.